to my channel. Today we are going to sew up the Tilly and the Buttons Billie sweatshirt that we modified on the last video for a narrow shoulder adjustment. So today we are sewing up the balloon sleeve version, which would actually be perfect for a narrow shoulder adjustment, because if we didn't do that narrow shoulder adjustment, the balloons would sit down here instead of right up on the shoulder where they should be. The fabric that I've chosen is this jacquard knit. It's purple with purple tones of like this leopard printy type thing. It has great stretch one way, not so much the other way, but that'll be perfect for what we're doing today. How to tell the difference between a jacquard knit and a different kind of knit is the fact that with a jacquard knit, these patterns are actually weaved into the piece of fabric itself. When I turn it onto the other side, it looks like it's some kind of French terry. Because it's fairly textured, and you can see those weaves coming through as well with the other pattern. I've got my computer behind me here for the instructions. I've had a look at the instructions before, and they look pretty similar to most of the instructions for Tilly and the Buttons patterns. I've got my serger ready. It is threaded with white, which isn't ideal, but I can't be bothered to change it right now, so we're going to use white for serging. I've got my sewing machine here if I need it, especially for the gathers, because I'm going to need to gather the balloon sleeve, and then my iron's at the ready over there. Once I finish the garment, I will let you know my review of the pattern and the instructions, and then hopefully that will help you decide on whether or not you're going to sew up the Billie sweatshirt pattern for yourself. Let's get started. Okay, so here we are. I've got the shoulder seams pinned. The first thing that you do with most of Tilly's patterns is attach your shoulder seams together so that you can then add in your neckband. I am going to serge these straight away, and then I'm going to get the neckband ready. There are some steps that I'm going to do today that I'm not going to show you, such as typically after every seam I press with my iron. The heat from the iron presses the threads into the fabric and allows them to set so that the garment actually becomes stronger. So if you're not currently pressing your seams after every single time you sew, I would encourage you to do that so that you can ensure that you're going to make a garment that's going to stand the test of time. I am sewing with a 5/8 seam allowance as well. And what I love about my serger is that it cuts off all my seams so I don't have to later. And I'm actually going to do my neckband now as well, just so that I can press it when I'm over at the iron. Neckbands I don't typically pin together, I just kind of wing it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and press, and then we will move on to attaching the neckband to the sweater piece. Okay, so we've pressed everything. I've pressed the serged shoulder seams to the back. I'm now just fitting in the neckband. There are a couple of methods that you can use to fit your neckband to your knit garment. One of them includes quartering each piece and then matching your quarters, which I will do another tutorial video on another date. What I'm doing today is I'm just going to pin my neckband on, and I'm going to stretch it gently as I pin to make sure I get a nice even pin the whole way around. I'm then going to use my sewing machine to baste the neckband on first before serging. I've learned the hard way that if you serge first, you will end up with some kind of mistake or a pucker, and you will not be able to fix it. You'll have to cut whole new pieces. So I always baste first with a sewing machine, check the neckband, make sure it's sitting properly, and then I go ahead and serge. So that's what we're going to do. So actually what I might do is I might just baste it instead of pinning and stretch as I go along. I think that's the route we're going to take. Alright, let's baste this on. It looks like we need a pretty even stretch the whole way around. Alright, where's our seam? Okay, I'm going to head over to the sewing machine and baste this on. Okay. Okay, so we've basted the neckband on. What I did was I just put in a few stitches to start, and then I stretched the neckband as much as I could around the whole way, keeping an eye on how much of the neck opening I still had. It worked out pretty well. It's a strategy that I've used many times. What I always do after I've basted it is I just go around and I check that I've not got any puckers before I start serging, which everything is looking pretty good here. This is why I always baste before I stitch, because then I can say, okay, I didn't do that too well, I need to unpick it, and unpicking a base stitch on a knit is much easier than unpicking a narrow stitch. So now that I've got that and I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and serge it all together, making sure that my serger is cutting off the baste as I go. Okay, so I've just pressed what I did with the neckline. The instructions say that if the neckline is not sitting well, to top stitch around the outside, but this fabric is actually pressing pretty nice. I'm pretty happy with how smooth it is, so I'm gonna leave it. I'm not gonna top stitch. I can always go back and top stitch after with it being around the neckline. It's something that's fairly easy to do if I decided I want to do it later. I now have my balloon sleeves. They're very large pieces. So I've got my balloon sleeves here, and I'm going to insert the gathering stitches on both the sleeve head and the hem, and then I'll attach that to the main piece of the sweater. Okay, so I've got the first sleeve on with the bubble. I haven't unpicked any of the gathers yet. I'm gonna now go ahead and insert my second sleeve. So the instructions say that you need to line up the corners and all of the notches, trying not to stretch the fabric. And then you pull the top 3 threads of the gather. So you grab the top 3 on one side and you pull them to make the gathers, and then you're gonna pull them until the gathers fit in between either the front notch and the shoulder notch, or the back notch and the shoulder notch. You'll end up doing both of them. So you just pull them until, so I've got my shoulder notch here and my back notch here. I'm going to pull this until this piece of fabric fits in between the two of them. And I'm trying to make my gathers as even as possible so that the balloon from the outside looks quite even. Okay, almost there. Okay, and then once you have the gathers done, you pin. I'm pretty happy with that gather. I like to pin a lot on gathers to make sure that they don't start sliding all over the place. Then you go to the other side. Actually, I'm just going to pin here too. Just to make sure it all stays in place. Then you go to the other side and you pull on the other side of the gathers to now gather this side. So now on this side, I'm going to gather between my shoulder notch, which is here, and my front notch, which is over here. Okay, I'm now pinning them in place. The next step is to baste the sleeve on so that you can make sure that your balloon sleeve looks well proportioned and that you like the look of it. If you stitch straight away, you're not going to be able to change it very easily. So you want to baste first. After I baste, I'm then going to serge them together and I'll show you the end result. Okay. The next step says that we need to sew the arm sleeves and the bodices together, front to back. So I'm just going to do that now. If you watched my previous video, you know that I don't pin this part. I kind of just hold pieces together until you reach the ends. So I've now got my sleeves and bodice pieces sewn together. I'm just going to try and snip this serger thread but not get my gathering threads. The next step I'm going to do is sew together my cuffs, and at the same time I'm going to sew together my hem band, just to save myself a step because I know that that's what's coming and a hem band is fairly straightforward. So I'm going to set this aside, and after that I'm going to start gathering the sleeve portion to go into my cuff. Okay, so here we are with the finished Tilly and the Buttons Billie top with the balloon sleeves. This is the pattern that I used to create my narrow shoulder adjustment on my previous video. As you can see here, I probably could have done with another maybe 1/4 inch or so that the balloons sit right up at the top. But you can imagine if I didn't do that narrow shoulder adjustment, how far down the balloon sleeves would be on my shoulder. So I'm quite happy that I did that. It's still a very wearable garment. The sleeves are very balloony, which I love. It's very comfortable and very loose fitting, which I'm loving. The neckline sits really nicely, so I'm really happy with that. And I might think about actually just taking these up just a little bit more, just to make sure that those balloons are really sitting up at the top instead of kind of down at the sides. I would suggest probably another 1/4 inch narrow shoulder adjustment here to make sure that I'm going to get them sitting up here. A couple of things about the pattern. With the sleeve, you had to do quite a bit of gathering before inserting the cuff, and the instructions actually say to slide the cuff over top of the ungathered fabric first and then do your gathers. I found it much easier to do the gathers first and then slide my cuff over. It also helped make sure that my gathers were quite even all the way around my cuff. So I would recommend gathering your sleeves first, at least a little bit, so that you can fit your cuff right on top of the gathers, and then adjusting your gathers from there. It was much more easier for me. Along with the gathers, when you are putting the shirt together, you actually end up doing the side seam of the sleeve first. I had put my gathering stitches all the way to the end, and then I had to unpick them in order to make room to be able to sew the sleeve together. So I would recommend maybe starting your gathering stitches about 1 inch away from the edge of your fabric to make sure that you have that room to be able to attach your sleeves together at the sleeve seam. With the sleeve head gathers, there are notches to guide you. However, the front sleeve notch and the shoulder seam notch are both just one snip. So I actually went from the back seam notch up to the shoulder the first time, and then realized I should have went all the way around to the front seam notch. So just make sure that you are going from the back all the way past that first notch, which is your shoulder notch, and then coming down to the front notch so that you can get your gathers evenly. And I think that this fabric, as much as it's really comfortable, for the balloon sleeves to have a true balloony effect, the fabric needs to be a bit more heavier. This is quite a light fabric. It would do a lot better if it was maybe more of a sweatshirting fabric, because then the sweatshirting, the stiffness of the sweatshirting would hold these balloon sleeves up, but overall I'm quite happy with it. I would make this pattern again. I like it. It was easy enough to follow. The instructions were really easy to follow. There were a couple of things that I just knew how to do because I've been sewing for quite a while and I've been using Tillie's patterns for quite a while. So there were some steps that I didn't need to follow exactly, but when I went through the instruction manual, they were all very easy to follow and were great for somebody who's just beginning to sew with knit fabrics. I would recommend using your sewing machine and a serger if you have it, but if you only have a sewing machine, you can turn these dials here to use a zigzag stitch for the stitching of the whole sweater. It works perfectly fine and it'll hold up in the wash. So that's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed following along while I sewed the Tillie and the Buttons Billie top. I will be making more. I will probably pick a different fabric so that it's a bit heavier, and I will post those results to my Instagram. You can follow me over on Instagram at So Many Garments. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, give us a like, and comment below if there are any other patterns that you'd like to see made up and have reviewed, or if you have any other questions or comments. Thanks!